Next on our agenda is the first reading of the Alternative Energy Overlay District Ordinance. I was asked early on if we were going to read it all, and the person who asked me said they're not offering to read it all. So here's the way we're going to do it. It's a long and very intense. We will go page by page or section by section with each portion of this. You all have had a chance to get a copy of it. There's a few more copies up here if I think it's possible. If not, we'll make more.
There's plenty.
So, with that, I'll open it up to you two to start on first section or first page. How are we going to do it?
Mr. Chairman, you should get a motion on the table.
Oh, we do have to have a motion for the first reading.
Right. And then there's the discussion. Once we have a
Motion to go into this reading of the alternative energy ordinance.
I'll make the motion.
For a second.
Yeah, second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you.
You're fine.
Start?
Yeah, do you want to go section by section or page by page? Which is there a preference?
Myself, I like to go start on a page, and then if you need to go over to the next part of that, next page for that section, it's fine. Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, you want to start? You want?
Yeah.
Page one.
The first thing I had on note is page 1, section 6.2.11.2, paragraph 1, where it talks about the 100-foot by 100-foot area definition, and then it talks about the access road and 5 feet from the edge of the access road. Do we need to clarify what the width of the road would be? Because I mean, if we go 5 feet from, we need to have an edge determination, don't we?
I think legally, couldn't the county have a determination on the width of what county road needs to be? That's my understanding.
Right. On that section, I also wondered, and this is something that I would have to ask legal counsel or ask planning and zoning administrator. With these setbacks, is this for all subdivisions? Because this actually would be a subdivision in my estimation, if I'm looking at it correctly.
I think you'd have to ask that of Joe.
I would have to ask that of Joe. So that is a question I have. Would this be something that would go forward for the future?
On everything is just is a subdivision.
So would this be a requirement for all subdivisions thereafter?
Can we go get Joe?
He's not here today.
Guess I could go get Joe.
Yeah, we can ask him that question. I would, because this is an overlay, I would think not, but we can ask him that question.
I'm just trying to cover the bases here.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, back to my access road, under the subparagraph, the II, it says access road. In my mind, that's the access road off the public road back to a turbine, right? And again, I think we need to have a width of that road to determine how far off the side of that road.
The access road itself.
Yeah, I know the public road, I mean, that's all well defined and everything, but.
I can agree with that too.
Moving on, second page, anybody have anything?
Yeah, the only thing I had at the very top was to make sure that when we talk about applicants, this is really geared for the most part towards wind rather than solar, so I think we just need to make sure at some point we understand what we're talking about here. So clearly defining and either adding solar or waiting to put solar in after this is all covered. Because it very specifically says CWEX. Under the, at the very top of the page. talking very specifically again about CWEX. And we probably need to include solar as well at some point.
I agree, because they're two different beasts.
Okay.
Okay. Page 3.
The same thing again, a non-participating property at the very top, I said CWEX. It was really the focus here, but again, we need to keep in mind, we're talking about solar, and then the very next one under operator was the same thing. Kind of goes through the whole list, actually, as you go down. Owners, we don't really talk about solar again, so we just need to make sure where we're at, and making sure that we're covered on both spectrums of that alternate energy area.
So what you're wanting to do is add solar specifically to that, not just the CWEX.
Yeah, in addition to CWEX and solar, correct. And we can use the acronym. Pretty sure everybody knows what that is at this point. But that was really it for me, just making sure that we are inclusive. Anything on your chat?
No, I didn't have anything. That's a good catch on the add the solar to that. Since the definitions control both of the solar.
Page 4. Anything on page 4?
I did.
Yes. Go ahead, Jeff.
The application procedures needed, do we need to, is there a need to list the application procedures
Where are you at?
on page 4? Should the procedures be listed prior to the review and approval sections?
Are you taking procedures or process?
Yeah, the application process or procedures needed.
That would be something I think we would need to ask Joe. If that is something that he does for everybody, or is it just a standard procedure, the application procedure?
Yeah, we can ask Joe. I think we just need to make sure we have a good, clear, defined process. I had a couple, if you got any more on that, please.
No.
Okay, so under item 3 on page 4, if you go down through there, you can see that we have 2 Ds listed out. One of those should be, the first one is really typically, it should be E if we're referencing back to the previous document. And then the second one is D, so.
So it's a typo type thing.
Yeah, well, we can flip flop on the typo, but anyway, under what is currently the first D, section number 4, we're talking about setback measurements. It says section 6.2.11.4, that should actually be 6.2.11.3. And then 2 in parentheses to get us back to the right section. And then as you go down through here, you can see that with Joe on formatting, but these E's and F's and G's will all change as well. Okay.
Page 5.
Again, at the very top, page 5, that lettering sequence will change because of what happened on page 4, so we should be fine there. Once Joe gets that reformatted. Going down through the rest of page 5, again, under the review and approval process and procedures rather, I added solar again, Chad, to where you and I talked about earlier, to make sure that we're a little more comprehensive and making sure we're there. Then down under section A, 5A, about 2/3 of the way down, it refers to section 2-11-4-0-M. M is not correct. It should say A through D, as in Delta. You have anything, Chad?
No.
Page 6.
Same thing, a very, very top line, page 6. Again, it says section 6.2.11-4.0.1-M. That should again be not M, but rather A through D, as in Delta again. off to the right there. Under section D, the next one down under public hearing, again, the same thing, it says section 2, 6 to 11, 4. And first the section M in there should actually again be A through D, as in Delta. Section, again, page. We're on 6, right?
Correct.
Yeah, page 6, under requirements for commercial and there's not a whole lot in there, other than, I was a little concerned, we don't have anything on fire suppression for solar, we don't have anything on wind either, but, fire suppression, I don't know if that, where that would fall in, other than maybe the battery storage.
The collection.
I don't know, you had some thoughts on it earlier, so.
Yeah, I think the battery collection point needs to have some type of fire suppression extinguishment mechanism put in place there. I've never heard of a solar panel itself
Explode and burn.
catching on fire or anything of that nature. I'm not saying it couldn't, but I've never heard of it.
Anything else? 7?
I didn't have anything on 7.
We'll do that. Page 8.
Again, we've talked, fire suppression extinguishment equipment in each of the units.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, that was a note I had as well. We've heard some comments and some input from some folks from public on fire suppression. And I think there are some systems that are out there, I think we talked about 4 or 5 of those.
And I think that's, by, having a self-contained extinguishment process in place might alleviate big problems later.
300 or 400 acres of dried corn catching on fire. Okay.
Page 9. There's some else on it.
That's only, yeah,
Anything else on it?
6 to 11, 4. Yeah.
No.
Right.
On page 9, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, page 9 under section E, a little concern on the 1.1 times the height of the tower and the rotor when we're looking at public right-of-ways. Doesn't seem like a lot in a catastrophic situation. Don't know what you guys think about that.
What letter are you under?
E as in elephant. Maybe I'll go up there.
I did make a note on there myself, 1.5, just for the sake of consistency versus a 1.1 for this, and then a 1.5 for this. I think it'd be better, a little more streamlined if it was a consistent distance like that.
Yeah, I would
On
agree
some
with
of
Agree with
those.
that.
And then the DD, but the county line distances from the county line. Just for the sake of discussion. Is that 1320 from the county line, is that doable in your mind, or is that, what's thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's doable. I think it's obviously up to us to make sure that we have that covered. Do you have concerns? You think it's not enough? You think it's too much?
Well, in my notations here, I had 1,640 feet from the county line.
And that's a quarter.
Yeah.
So it's just,
that would give,
More reference.
you know, I know across the county line would be another county, and it'd be under theirs, but
What do you wanna go to? 1640?
I thought
Why,
16,
why 1640?
that was the half measurement of the 3280.
Be closer to a quarter of a mile.
Right, wrong, or indifferent, that was just a thought. I'm not saying it's the right one or wrong one, but I'm just saying it's a thought. And then under E, again,
1320 is a quarter of a mile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
then under E again, the right of way, 1.5 instead of 1.1, just for the sake of consistency in measurements.
Okay. I can, yeah,
And
go with that.
I hate to monopolize the time here, but
Keep going, no, it's fine.
page 9, 3D, would that long drawn out paragraph there be better cut into separate paragraphs, separating the topic of discussion? And I'm thinking about halfway down, it says, required note, then compliance measurements should be required. I think that's kind of getting into a different subject matter, so I thought maybe a paragraph change might be good there.
Yeah, I read that too, and it's really long to your point. I think we can just reformat that and maybe indent it.
Yeah,
So that we've got the bullet points to look at rather than full long. There's another couple of those similar to that as we get deeper into this as well.
you know, I'm not a grammar expert by any means or punctuation, but it just seems like it maybe needs to have a break there.
Yeah, we can do a better job probably of breaking that down with some bullet points. Or, the way he formatted some of those others, and then a good example of that, yeah, just going back to, yeah, maybe a couple of examples in here if I can find them. But to your point, yeah, like on page 4, he breaks it down a little bit with sound modeling and previous reports, so we can break it down, with bring that in, italicizing some of those points, so they're more visual, yeah, so you can see them. So, yeah, I would go with that.
Anything else on mine?
Yeah, just a minor little typo, page 9, under noise and adverse sound characters, item number 3, under, A, the very last sentence has like a period and a comma, so it should be one or the other. I didn't catch that. And that surprised me.
Sorry.
Page 10.
Page 10, under A, it looks like. Now, the 5-foot underground, if the developer can demonstrate the need for an overhead line and acceptance of landowners, if I'm not sure if I would agree that that depth should be waivable. I mean, just because they run into a piece of hard ground, there's ways of trenching in solid rock. You know, is there a need to have that waivable? Again, I mean, if they wanted to go 3 foot, and just for the consistency of the 5 feet, you know, that's not a stopping block for me by any means, but I just want to talk about it.
Yeah, I would agree, you can trench through just about anything these days, so 5 feet should be fairly consistent.
Anything else? I have something on 10.
Couple things that I
Under 7, the financial assurance. I disagree with an escrow account, first of all, and I'd have to have something, I understand the reason for escrow accounts, but bonding seems to be better, and it's also, is this $5 million per tower, $5 million in total, whatever, and I understand that there is some concern on bonding, that it does not follow who owns it, but legally, can there some way that you can have a bond follow the ownership of the tower? We would need to look into that.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to give me a more specific scenario and then let me look into it.
Okay, what I don't like, first of all, it says $5 million. I don't know if that's for the total wind program, for tower, whatever. Then also, that is if you do a bond, an escrow. But that's why I'd rather have a bond, because then you're talking about you can have it for every tower. But Steve mentioned to me that they've had issues in Wise County with rights.
Right.
I would like to know if you have a bond, if someone has a bond for that tower, if the ownership of that tower goes to some other company, can you force the bond to go with it? Or then they also have to be required to have a bond?
Yeah, I mean, the requirement should be that if it's sold to a different company, they have to have the same bond in place. Whether the bond that previously been issued would cover it, but you have to look at the terms of the bonding. But either way, they have to be able to continue with the bonding that was already in place, or they would have to establish the bonding.
So the problem we ran into in the Wise County with the solar system was that Russ was managing that farm was sold 2 or 3 times. And in the transition of being sold, the bond expired, and it took about 3 weeks to find who the new property owner actually was, who happened to be in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time that all evolved, they were actually they were no longer in compliance with the ordinance, and so they were really in a decommissioning stage, but they couldn't decommission because they didn't know where the bond was to be able to access the dollars to be able to actually do that. And then once they did get that contact, it was about 90 days roughly before they could even access any bonds to be able to start that decommissioning process. So that was the initial thought, we should go, and Kelly, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but that was the original thought was we need to escrow because we can access that much more quickly rather than having to wait 90 to 120 days for a bond. So the other part of that question is that bond held with the recorder and recorded, or is the escrow held in the treasurer account?
It says auditor on there, it doesn't say
I
treasurer.
know, and that's one of my notes, should it be the treasurer?
I don't keep track of bonds.
You don't, but escrow accounts.
Who has an escrow account?
Well, we could potentially hear. Okay.
To kind of go along with that, maybe confuse it more, if there was an escrow and if there was a withdrawal of that, is there any mechanism to put that back up to its original point?
That's the intention, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's the intent, but was it spelled out in there clear enough to, I mean, if there was a draw against that escrow, to replenish it up to the original agreed upon amount, to renew it or replenish it or refill, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, in this particular case,
A bond, you know, I think they're probably a little bit different.
we're talking about just 1 or 2 or whatever, actually remediate damage to the property within that.
I think first of all, we need to find out if that $5 million, is that per tower or per total?
That's right.
Yeah.
We can review that some more.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Yeah, a couple of little things here. To Kelly's point a minute ago, under 7 acts of God, man-made disasters, under A, responsibility of owner, towards the bottom of that, just before the $5 million, it says Henry County Auditor is the owner of the escrow account. I don't know if that's correct, if we should visit with these two folks and make sure it's the auditor or the treasurer, where that money would actually sit and reside.
That would be a whole new ballgame.
An opportunity for you to investigate that?
Me, I don't know. But I mean, would it be an interest bearing account? I mean, is it just gonna sit there? It's, you know,
It's an escrow, so I guess we can
escrow is where they keep putting money in it and
Right.
we keep taking money out for a payment.
understand.
There's not a payment. Where would the payment go? Unless there's something that happens. That's an escrow account. That doesn't make sense.
Well, like when you buy a house, you put money in escrow, right? It's an escrow.
And then it comes
But
back
something
out.
Pulling out.
Once you
Keeps coming
pay for
out.
it, yeah.
But this is saying it's not gonna come out unless there's a
That's
man-made
right.
disaster.
So there's gonna be
So-
interest on it at some point.
So if, when you're paying your escrow account to a bank, and the bank's holding that money, they're making interest on your money. Are we gonna make interest on their money?
We hope
I mean-
to. I think we should, yeah.
You know, I mean,
Answer your
that, this is all.
Okay, so we need to investigate that a little bit more. Again, down at the very bottom, under property value guarantees, the very last, next to last sentence, it says section 6211.4, and it goes PD. That should be 6211.4.01. N, I believe is correct. Or 6211.4.01 dot two as in all.
And just for conversation, if we could slide back up to number 6, page 10, number 6, density. The maximum of one industrial wind turbine or CWEC structure shall be placed on a parcel. If it were a huge tract of land and the setback compliance was observed on everything, is there a need to only have one on that parcel, or is that spelled out clear enough? I mean, if you had I don't know of anybody having square mile tracts of ground or 2 mile square tracts of ground or anything like that, but the density of the wind turbines. If that was compliant in all other aspects, would it still be limited?
Yeah, I think so, because the way I read that is the way it's broken down by parcel is the way it's broken down through like the assessor and the treasurer's office where they pay taxes, so the parcel would be parsed to that specific section of ground.
Okay.
Page 11.
Top of page 11, you know, it's probably goes through the whole ordinance as well, but again, solar, we'll talk about CWEX as well as solar. And then decommissioning standards on item C, we talk about removing all of this, but we don't say how far down we have to go. And Chad, that's something that I talked about earlier. It's like, what is the depth of removal and replacement? And the only other thing on this, like from the last 2 or 3 pages through here, there's some formatting issues, I think, with where they're using letters or numbers or italics or whatever. We just need some consistency in the format. And it kind of carries forward all the way to the end of this document now. But that's really it on page 11.
On C then, when we talk about decommissioning, why are we worried about that at all? That's the landowner's worry, because he's the one that, he or she took on that responsibility to have the tower as an easement. So I don't feel that we need to have any control of that.
Chad?
Another concern, if you were to, where it says remove all say? I mean, that would include the wiring or the cabling or connection, you know, the big heavy gauge cabling. Would that be more disruptive to everything again after installation? Would that be more disruptive again? Would that tear up roads and things like that again after the install, if you were to remove it? Cause I don't, I mean, we're not talking a 12 gauge wire. I mean, we're talking a cable that's 4 inches diameter type thing, so.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, that that's kind of covered in, it's under, italics, whatever you wanna call that, where it says all areas ground that have been disturbed, back to. So I think that's covered, I understand your concern.
Yeah.
But again, that probably goes back to the property owner and the owner of the tower, the Mark's Corner owner.
You know, and all cabling will be in outside the right unless it's crossing a right of way, right? Then we talk about the 50 feet inside on the personal property side of the fence or the right of way line. So
Okay, then going on, then on 11, on B, on that very same topic of removal of utility lines. Are we talking below ground? And if so, when we put this into effect, this is where I need legal counsel. What do we do for other utilities that have put things below ground? Are we then, is this putting that subject to that also?
I would think that this ordinance just applies going forward, so this is prospective. So if it's already been in,
Okay, they've already had the water put in, I just question that.
We need to check with Joe on that as well, because it's an overlay, right, so.
yeah, you can check with Joe.
It's very specific to.
I always recommend checking with Joe, cause he knows the zoning code much better than I do.
Okay.
Okay, makes sense? Okay. So, just question, under that, in D, 4, can you just help me understand why that's in there? We're asking, to me, we're just asking that to be back into the original condition, and that's not our responsibility.
no concerns about the recycle. Just that's separate issue.
I'm not talking about the recycle, I'm talking about, in 4, yeah. You're asking that land to be restored exactly the way it was.
Yeah, which goes back to item C, number 1 and number 3. So I think it's just consistent with the previous verbiage,
Correct.
just to make sure that we have the consistency throughout the document. I understand you're saying it should fall back on the landowner. They should have some skin in the game, obviously, since they got paid, right?
Exactly. I mean, we're not asking any other landowner who puts up a building for industrial type use, if he has a permit for it, that he has to put everything back the way it was originally.
And to the county attorney's point, from this point forward, maybe, but this is an overlay. Okay, we can ask Joe that.
Can we zoom back to on page 11, C, triple I. Mid-paragraph there, it says, to the satisfaction of the Board of Supervisors. That's pretty,
See, that's why,
that could change.
that's why I say we should just get rid of it entirely.
is what might be satisfactory to one supervisor might not be to another, and I think it's,
Either that, or maybe we can check with Joe on that one too and see what the LISA standards are. With the USDA, at least that would be a documentation that would actually give some specifics rather than that.
subjective
Yeah,
type
that's
thing.
pretty subjective, yeah.
That's what I was getting at, it's pretty,
Okay.
Okay, page 12.
Page 12, I went through this again, not quite sure about the formatting. We need to work with that, make sure that we're consistent. And then, oh yeah, so under F, under financial security, under the first single italics, the very first group there, it says right to the middle, the approved amount of 200% of the total cost identified in section. It should be section 2, I think. Let me check.
Well, I still, on that very point, I have an issue with the escrow account again, so.
No, it's E. Should be section E. Cost identified in section E. And you said with the escrow amount?
I have still have issue with that. I think we need to have better clarification if the escrow bond would be better for us, and if there's an escrow, like you said, it's a pre-tower or whatever.
things like that.
Anything else on 12?
No.
13.
Page 12, just a couple of little things that are really formatting again under determination of abandonment, under item number 3 there, about halfway down, it says section F, large F, capital F, it should be small f to make it consistent and tie back into the actual line that we're talking about. Under determination of abandonment.
Oh, on page 13.
Yeah.
I think so, 12.
No, I'm sorry, 13, yeah. Under the third italics, it should say section F, and it should be a small f instead of a capital, so it ties back to the correct ordinance. And then again, if I look at 10, item 10, under C where it says road use agreements, the formatting. I think to Chad's point earlier, we could probably do a better job of breaking this down. Because it makes some reference to some previous ordinance documentation, and it's a really long and lengthy, and probably could use some better wording.
Said, I mean, I think we, has Jake had the opportunity to look and digest this aspect of this part of it?
I don't know if he's seen this final version. I know he's seen the preliminary version, and he provided some input and some feedback. But yeah, he's probably not seen this, and he's out of town, right? So we probably need his input for that to make sure we're all consistent with what he's thinking. He's the expert, right?
He's the engineer on roads, that's for sure.
Page 13. I mean, excuse me, 14.
I have nothing.
I had under 14, where it talked about road damages must be repaired within a 30-day window. I can see some issues of that causing a problem, whether, you know, but 30 days to
essentially rebuild, or I think probably could jump that guideline of 30 days. I mean, look at our county projects that, you know, they sometimes go longer and depend on weather related and that type of thing.
I think your point, we can visit with Jake on that, but I think if they get it started,
Yeah.
I know that there's,
You know,
they're at least making an
some
effort to
show
get
of
going.
not
A show of
ignoring it
faith.
anymore.
15.
Yeah, just a couple little things, again, goes back to formatting. It's not matching, but again, it's mostly formatting. And again, Mark, there's an escrow thing in there.
The escrow and the dollars, and, that is something I did wanna ask Jake. The thing is $3 million, is a lot of road, might not go far enough, and that has to be revisited on an annual basis or every few years, or whatever, that type of thing, and if it's, what happens if it's on a hard surface road too? So, just some questions all on that one.
You know, I also made a note here too, on page 14, section D, under the drainage system. Prior to construction of the CWEX, all existing drainage tiles, I mean, all drainage tiles, I mean, are you gonna scope my basement floor drain? I mean, where, I know the gist of it, I mean, field tile, you know, tiles in the roadway, you know, that type of thing, but where it says all existing drainage tile, are we talking just field tile? Is that the intent of it?
I assume.
I think so, too.
Assumption, yes.
But it says private drainage systems to the extent caused by the construction of operations and maintenance, so.
And then the requirement for all of them to be robotically imaged and recorded and reviewed.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we do, the owner, if we tie that back to the specific parcels where that's gonna happen, but, you know, with pattern tiling.
Might not show up until 3 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we don't inspect it, so I don't, to your point, I know what you're trying to get at, but I don't know how we fix that.
You know, as the one over there, and, well, Greg and I had one over, you know,
So, Centerville?
yeah.
15.
Yeah, you had mentioned that, and they're gonna review those dollars that we talked about, right? And again, formatting was the only issue I had there.
Okay. Everything's good? 16.
One thing on 16, under complaint resolution, which is the item number 2, at the very bottom of A, we talk about a complaint received from a non-participating property owner who has executed a waiver agreement. I don't know if this is just semantics, but it should be a written waiver agreement. And,
Get away from the he said, she said.
yeah, just for making sure we're documented. And then there was some, as I looked at that, it looked to me like we should probably break that down to, like you talked about earlier, Chad, we should break that down into sections, so we know we're talking about property line setbacks, structure setbacks, county line setbacks, noise setbacks. And get those so we know that we're talking very specifically about those items and make sure they're covered, rather than just being a general statement. And I've got a note on mine for all that.
Anything
Instead
else?
of the run on.
Yeah. That's it for me. On 16. On page 17, the second paragraph, I believe there's a error in that reference where it's talking about any testing. It says 6-2-11-4, and then in parentheses 9, I believe that should be 6-2-11-5, and parentheses 03. And I think that's all I have on 17.
Okay. We have, we can schedule our next reading at an appropriate time. Will next week give us enough time?
Mr. Chairman, if I may. The way it's normally done is that we did a motion, there was a motion to approve the ordinance. We've had our discussion. Now, if there's, we would proceed to taking a vote on passing it. But there are several changes mentioned. There should be a motion to amend the ordinance to reflect the changes that were discussed, and then have a vote on that.
Okay, my question is, do we have to take each one in itself, or each one, because there's a discussion, I'm thinking about the escrow versus bonding.
Yeah, just go with what we've already discussed, make those changes, and then if we have time to look at it at the second reading, we can come back and say, okay, we have to amend again because what was proposed at this meeting is not gonna work.
I'm saying that I didn't think we had a consensus on some of these changes, we just noted changes.
Yeah.
Possibility.
And that's a possibility that if you vote for, if there's an amended motion now, it may be a 2-to-1 vote. It may not, or the motion may not pass, so. That's how we move to the next step, is the motion to amend the ordinance based on the discussion.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the amendments to this reading of this ordinance.
I'll make a motion to approve, the ordinance with the amendments that we have talked about. Further follow-up.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Discussion. Will we have this ready for us to look at next week?
Yeah, that was gonna be my question
And
as
then,
well.
would one of you like to take that and follow up on with Joe and our legal counsel?
It might be best, given that there's several issues we still wanna look into, if you set it out at least 2 weeks
That's what
for
I
the
was
next
thinking.
meeting.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask, we have the planning and zoning administrator is out until the 13th, so probably does not facilitate his schedule very well. So maybe 2 weeks to
2
would be a better time frame for our second reading on the 22nd.
On the 22nd?
And that also gives us time to print up a copy of the new
Correct.
ordinance, so it'll be available for the public and for everybody to discuss at the
That's
next.
the second reading next one.
Yeah.
With the edits and everything.
Right, yeah.
To move things forward.
I made that motion.
Yes, we have a
Discussed
second.
it.
All those in favor say aye,
Aye.
and I will say aye to this. We need to see what the changes are,
Right.
Right.
right? And we will then also